You're in the kitchen of your childhood home. You're looking for something to eat. And as you're scrummaging through the pantry or your refrigerator, find that beloved Reese's peanut butter cup. Then you grab a Mountain Dew from the fridge and you return to your room and you just continue playing. Later on that evening, your dad shows up or your mom shows up from work and you can't even focus on greeting them because of the glorious smell from the bag they're holding in their hand. That smell is probably some McDonald's fries, chicken nuggets, some sort of fast food. After demolishing this dinner and before bed, you enjoy a nice big bowl of ice cream. At least that's what Ronnie and I enjoyed when we were growing up with our father. And a version of this day just continues and continues and continues for the rest of your childhood. Some version of this. And then one day as an adult, as if out of nowhere, you're in a doctor's office and you're diagnosed with something like acid reflux or Crohn's disease or diverticulitis or IBS, they call it, inflammatory bowel disease. One of those. You're in despair. You wonder how this can happen to you. You assume it's genetic and out of your control. But today we're going to tell you why, of course, it's totally in your control and what you can do to fix your gut. And one of the things I want you to take away from this is that just remember that the time it took you to destroy and hurt your gut is the time it's going to take to heal your gut. Not literally, but that's the mindset you need to go into this with.
Yeah. I went through this personally and had a lot of, in my mid to late 20s, had a lot of acne and rosacea due to some major gut issues. What I think, there was a lot of different things I never knew what the real, I went through a lot of different tests, stool tests, gut tests, all kinds of stuff, just trying to figure out what was wrong with me.
You worked with a functional medicine doctor as well.
Yeah, many functional medicine doctors, regular doctors. And, there was a bunch of different things that came up, a parasite here or some candida in there, but nothing too crazy. And eventually I kind of got through it over a bunch of different things, that I did to help me get through it. And we'll talk about some of those things that I did and what other people suggest. But it took me a good 5+ years to get over this. And it was psychologically one of the most roughest things to get through, especially when you're a young 20-something. And, I always feel for people going through that and seeing a teenager going through that or seeing an adult going through it. And you see a lot of that more nowadays of adults going through this rosacea, redness of their face or adult acne. And a lot of that has to do with your gut and just damage your gut. And like Randy said, my diet wasn't very good for most of my life. And then once I got into college, I was drinking a lot, 2 to 3 times a week, heavily. So it was a lot of it to my own issues. And, doing some reflection, there was a lot of stress as well, which is another thing.
Stress is huge.
We're going to talk about as well that causes a lot of issues with your gut.
Yeah, stress is huge. We've talked about this on in previous videos on here before, but roughly 60% of Americans have a chronic disease. If you look at the percentage of Americans diagnosed, keyword is diagnosed, with a digestive disease, it's about 25%, so 1 in 4 people. And just to give one example, the keyword diagnosed is you weren't diagnosed with anything, right? But you definitely had a digestive, call it disease, and you had to heal it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a huge amount of the population. Some of the big ones that I saw is, of course, IBS is a huge one, inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, colitis, diverticulosis or diverticulitis, gallstones, GERD, it's called sometimes, chronic acid reflux, and then fatty liver disease is even something that like 24% of adults have, fatty liver disease, but it's related to GI issues. And yeah, this is a widespread issue, and a lot of folks probably have something, they just don't know it. People are probably sitting around with rosacea or sitting around with issues where they're constantly having stomach problems, and they just don't know how to heal it, and they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't really. They just don't. They've been dealing with it most of their life, and so they just kind of learn to adapt and work with it.
Yeah. Yeah. As you can imagine, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, diet is one of, a large aspect in having a good, diverse, healthy gut. And I that's one of the biggest reasons why I think a lot of adults have all this acid reflux. And then there's a lot of data that I was looking into, a lot of these acid reflux, and they call them, what do they call them? PPIs? Is that what they call those acid reflux drugs?
Yeah.
Protein prohibitors. But a lot of those don't, they affect your good gut bacteria and your bad bacteria in ways that are not advantageous to diversity and long-term health. It's like temporary relief just with a lot of the drugs that we have within pharma these days, and those kind of do the same. So you eat a cheeseburger from McDonald's and a big fries and a big Coke, and then you have some acid reflux, and then you make it worse by taking the acid reflux, and then this is a continuous thing before next thing you know, you have leaky gut syndrome, which they say that's like the main, that's when your stomach has these tight junctions and they essentially get ripped apart, and those are what's protective of your gut from other bad actors, toxins and stuff getting into your gut or getting out of your gut, if you will. And that's
like
when
out of your gut.
Really difficult to overcome, which is kind of what you were talking about, why it takes so long, why it took me so long to heal my gut, is because I had my tight junctions were probably pulled apart and I had leaky gut.
Yeah, because I think I've seen something along the lines of that your intestinal tract is like, I don't have the fact here, but it's like so long, like you can't even, it's like miles long or something like that. Like if you were to stretch it out. And they say that it's basically like an organ that's kind of outside your body, but kind of inside your body. And so it like doesn't get in contact. The things that go through it doesn't get into contact with anything else. And so when you destroy those tight junctions, things that are inside your those things start mixing and they're not supposed to, and that's when you start getting those autoimmune diseases where your body starts attacking itself. That's essentially an autoimmune disease where it's like it's attacking its own self. And then Crohn's disease is one of the bigger ones of those autoimmune diseases, but they're few and far between nowadays. Like there's a lot of autoimmune diseases. Two of the top things I notice as far as like healing your gut is, the first one is getting enough fiber from a broad variety of plant foods. And this I saw come up a lot, and there's a few different studies of this. There's this Stanford, I'm looking at the study here, the Stanford high fiber trial, where they deliberately increased vegetables and fruits, nuts and seeds, beans and whole grains, and they increased fiber from like 21 grams to 45 grams a day. And then there was another study around plant diversity where they looked at greater than 30 different plant foods a week. So taking that increase, and and what they saw is that like the overall composition of your gut got better, and when you did that, when you had that increase, and like the study was looking at people eating 30 or more plant foods a week versus someone eating 10 or 10 or less per week, which is normal American diet. 30 different plant foods is a lot, but herbs are included. And so if you're using a lot of herbs in your cooking, that's different. Those are different plant foods, right? So if you're using cilantro and rosemary and um, different, all sorts of different, basil and whatnot, then is included in there. But the idea is that you should increase the diversity of your gut, and then that will increase your the health of it. They looked in. There's like been a decent amount of studies around traditional hunter-gatherer societies, and they would test their stools and test their gut, and hunter-gatherer societies ate over 100. It depended on the society, but they roughly would eat over 100 different plant species, and compared to 8 to 10 for an American, and that's something that was just repeated in many different studies. And there's this American Gut Project in 2018 that found a lot of that same evidence. And so that's what I encourage. There's a few ways you can do that. You can eat smoothies and stuff some stuff in there. There's these powders by Dr. Cowan. He has these powders they create, and you can just dump powders of really high nutrient dense plants. There's products like Athletic Greens out there nowadays. Paleo Valley has a product of a bunch of different plants, foods in a drink and a powder that you can use. But just try to increase your diversity. That's a huge thing. And then the other one is kind of close, but eating fermented foods.
Yeah. I was just going to add to that. I'd start gardening would be like one of the main things to increase that in yourself. Just like simple things, just a couple vegetables or fruits or whatever. You plant fruit.
Basil's like, you can't kill it.
Yeah, for sure. Because one of the things that Zach Bush talks about, and one of his things that he would always triple certified, board certified doctor, and but one of the things he talked about was breathe your biome. It's like the environment that we breathe, and he talked about how our guts is like a communication network with our environment. So a lot of those studies, and there was the American Gut Project study, but then there was a few other folks who joined the like indigenous Hadza tribe, and just living with this tribe out in wilderness, their entire gut completely transformed to a similar gut as the Hadza tribe, whereas this like extremely diverse gut that had way more strength. More diversity means more strength, when it comes to nature. And you want more diversity of your microbiome, more diversity of plants. And and to me, if you're pulling stuff out of your garden, or you can get a local CSA if you don't have the time, or you just don't have the room, or you're renting and can't do it. That's a big thing, because you're getting one, if you have your own garden, you're getting your hands in soil a lot, picking weeds, and you're eating food growing directly in soil. So you're getting all that natural, gut bacteria and breathing your biome and eating your biome. And so like Zach Bush talked about doing that, getting more into nature, not even just eating nature, but getting more into nature, breathing different environments. And then on top of that, remove like the two biggest toxins, which is glyphosate. That's one of the biggest lead indicators of leaky gut. And then chlorinated water was one other big one, which is, in everyone's water for tap water. We just did a video. You can check out our video previously to this, It was all about water, chlorinated water. It's a good thing for our water these days because we aren't dying and there's way less disease. But it's a bad thing because there's super high amounts of chlorine still in. I think it's the thing that's left over is called chlorine, is what they measure it by or whatever. But it's like hundreds of times the amounts that should be in our water is in there. So we're showering in it, and we're eating it, and it's having a major effect on our gut and our skin microbiome. Yep. So it's like Zach Bush talks about how like the diversity comes from from the outside in. So like, from nature and everything that you eat, it comes in. It's not.
That's why fermented foods is huge, because it's basically nature still fermented, and then you consume it and bring it into your body.
Yeah, that's probably the best way is the fermented foods, because you're getting a ton of it there, and it's you're bringing nature in there.
Sauerkraut and kombucha are like the popular two that you and I and our families consume, and then kimchi is another one that is popular.
Yeah,
but there's other stuff like people will you can ferment. You can really ferment anything, like any vegetable, but like Paleo Valley, their beef sticks are actually fermented. So there's like companies that understand this and ferment foods. And before we had refrigerators, everything was fermented. That's how it lasted forever. Everything had to, if it's fermented, then it could retain and wouldn't spoil. So that's a great one. Like breathe your biome.
Yeah.
Foods, avoiding toxins.
Yeah. We talked about the process or your diet. So processed foods and that junk, all that junk and bad seed oils and stuff, that's not creating a good environment that feeds high sugars. It feeds the bacteria. You just get high amounts of bacteria that aren't advantageous when they're at those high amounts. And then the good bacteria go on low amounts, and then you continuously do that. So like that's the biggest one. And then there's also another study on top of that where it talked about stress, which we mentioned at the beginning, but it found that exposure to stress compromised people's gut microbiota to the same effect as a poor diet did, which I thought was very interesting. And
that makes sense.
Yeah, we can add that in the show notes. But then there was another study I found that was even kind of blew me away, where it talked about how researchers took the gut contents from stressed rats and then transplanted them into normal unstressed rats.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what happened was the transplant alone from the stressed rats, all these normal rats started reproducing these stress, what they call phenotypes, which is like abnormal behaviors, increase blood cortisol levels and inflammatory cytokines. And, and essentially what they came to the conclusion on was that means that this disrupted microbiome can independently produce stress physiology in an otherwise calm animal. So like, and it's almost like in the way they were explaining it was like, you have a bunch of stress in your life, cause a bad gut. Now the gut starts to signal all these negative effects because you have the gut brain connection. So then it it's like a cycle now. You whatever caused the other is now in this complete cycle where the stress is causing the bad gut's causing the stress, or these other issues causing.
And you just have cravings for bad foods, processed foods, and then it obviously creates that cycle. That's huge. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing you see a lot nowadays, where it's like the gut is the second brain, because they talk about how like serotonin is produced in the gut. And serotonin is obviously important for your cognition and brain and mental health. I mean that alone should turn people's heads. Like if you heal your gut, you could potentially heal your mental health. There's a correlation there.
I think that's one of the main ways how I cured my rosacea and acne issues was getting there. There was a lot of stress and mental health issues with me. It was just in my head a lot. Anytime you get a breakout, it's just in my head, you know. And then I was like, oh, what did I eat to cause it? What am I doing wrong? So I was worried about eating things, just constant. And it was more when I started meditating, and then meditating a lot, because it was right during COVID when it really helped me during that COVID stage. I was able to work from home and meditate a lot longer, and it was like not looking in the mirror was a big one because it helped relieve that uh, acute stress, I would call it, and then just being able to like lower my stress levels and kind of. I was reading a lot of Joe Dispenza, so I was kind of thinking about my future before it was even. I was picturing myself with a clear face without any issues. So the combinations of those two was massive for me, and that's when I started to really see an uptick. And one of the things when I was looking on that stress, because a lot of people hear of the vagus nerve, and I've heard of that a lot. That's like your connection, like your communication cable from your, and it goes all the way from like your brain all the way through your entire body. It's connected to your gut. But like apparently its tone, how like strong and responsive it is, determines how well the brain and gut regulate each other. So like in a depression, they did this depression rats in this study, and they stimulated the vagus nerve, and it directly reversed depressive behavior by regulating the gut microbiota and some inflammation and metabolic disorders and stuff. So literally just like stimulating the vagus nerve and essentially making that tone stronger, like healed these rats, which is incredible.
It is incredible.
And the ways that you say they can do that, the three biggest ways, one of them was breath work. That was a big one. And then the other one was cold exposure. That was the strongest of the three. Because apparently the cold on the face, you probably remember this, cold on the face and the neck triggers like your mammalian diving reflex, which is an ancient survival response, which like sensory input from that nerve signals the brain stem, which fires the vagus nerve and slows your heart rate on the spot. It's apparently real fast and measurable. And it's like, so even brief cold exposure, which we do daily, is very impactful. That was like the main thing to help that vagus tone nerve, to help that communication between your brain and gut. That to me was some fascinating stuff.
That is fascinating. Yeah. Very powerful.
So breath work, all that stuff helps that connection and helps regulate each other, which is all very important.
Two other things as you were talking that popped in my head that we hadn't talked about as well was exercising. Was that it wasn't like the top two, but it was in the top four. Exercise.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It helps improve your gut. There's been a decent amount of research on it. It's obviously not the highest confidence one because exercise, but it definitely does help. And then antibiotics is another one. You mentioned briefly about Big Pharma. And you may go.
I'll say it's huge.
You may go to the doctor for an ear infection, right? And then they give you an antibiotic, and then 3 months later you have strep throat. And they give you an antibiotic. This has a huge negative effect on your microbiome, and that's what antibiotics do, right? Like antibio, it kills the good and the bad, and so you're destroying your gut, and then your body has to kind of generate. And they've shown that like it's just very difficult for your microbiome to regenerate, and sometimes it is never able to get back to that original state. They show this with mothers or children who are born C-section versus through vaginal canal, and some children are like never able to get back to like what they would have been at strength if they would have been born through the vaginal canal, just because all of the microbiome you get at first born. And so it's just like, it's critically important that like antibiotics should be like a last resort, even though your primary physician will use that and tool. And believe me, like my family has used it in certain scenarios, like emergency scenarios. But yeah, it's something that will have a huge impact not only on your like gut lining, but your entire ecosystem. And then yeah, that was it.
I want to stop real quick on that. I had that down too. The not being born, C-sections, non-vaginal births. That was a big one. That was something even before we had kids, we started noticing it in the clinical data when it comes to like eczema and the like, which you and I grew up with eczema. But I saw it with my kids compared to your kids. My wife went through 15 plus hours and just, luck wasn't on our side when it came. So we had 2 C-sections, unfortunately. And she did everything she could to not, and, it ended up how it was. But my kid had a lot of eczema, both my kids. And and we've been working with like a functional medicine doctor. We've been doing stool tests, and doing a lot of things that we talked about that the kids can tolerate. Obviously, they're not doing cold plunges and stuff. But like my youngest, he's a year and 9 months, and his gut is like completely transformed, almost not completely back to complete, homeostasis, but a lot of it's just getting them out into nature a lot. We did supplement with some probiotics a lot. I give him, try and get him a decent amount of fermented foods, kombucha, sauerkraut, yogurt, and both kids had a lot of rosacea, especially that first year, and both of them had them in different areas, but like a firsthand case where yours didn't really have a ton. You probably had a little bit of skin stuff, but theirs was a lot more extreme, I would say. And it was just, eating similar diets, similar genes, identical twins. So it's definitely a big factor, but it's something you can overcome. It's not like a life sentence. It could be a life sentence if your kid's sedentary, they're eating poor diets, not eating vegetables, not getting out into nature, then it could be a lifelong thing where they're dealing with it their entire life.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're a good test case being identical twins with children, and seeing the difference there. That's huge. That's one thing we hadn't mentioned, was probiotics. There's mixed research on probiotics. We're obviously not going to be able to get into the details of that, but there is mixed results on probiotics as a tool. I think from what I understand over 10 years of looking through literature and hearing from doctors, is that like it's not something that you want to take like every day. You get probiotics, good bacteria from like fermented foods is the best way. But if you have like an emergency scenario where like you take a bunch of antibiotics, then you may want to take this, or like you just mentioned for your children, when you have a C-section and you get completely removed from the birth canal, then maybe then you would want to take it, those like emergency situations. So yeah, do your own research, obviously, and make your decision on that. The other one, the fermented foods we didn't mention that you just mentioned, is obviously yogurt, but more importantly, raw milk is something that we've talked about in many videos before, but that's something where our family gets a lot of fermented, it's bacteria and to help your gut.
Yeah,
this was a good one. I think we got as far as we could probably get in 30 minutes, but I think this will help.
Yeah.
like Ronnie mentioned with like the water video, we just did it. You can go check on our YouTube channel, and there's a lot of different videos around health, and even in, around meditation, if that's something you're looking to get better at. We have videos on that as well. But yeah, please like the video, and follow us if you're enjoying the content.
Appreciate it. Take it easy.
Thanks, everybody.